26a. 26. And we're right before the Mishnah.
26b, did you say?
26a. 26a. Okay. And okay, we're in the middle of discussing whether or not a regal pays kafir. That's the question. And so far we successfully proved it because 1 second. Yeah. Because Reb Tarfon says that Karen in the domain of the nizik of the victim pays full kafir, even as a tam. And the explanation of that is it must be that regal also pays kafir, and that Reb Tarfon holds of the opinion that a tam pays kafir as well. And if that's the case, the Kal V'chomer makes a lot of sense, right? Just if regal who is exempt in a public area still pays kafir in a private area, for sure Karen should pay a full kafir in a private area. Okay. However, the Gemara tries to reject this possibility. No. It says there is no proof from this that regal has kafir. It could be that regal does not have kafir, and yet Karen in private property of a tam, of a naive animal, would still pay kafir, full kafir. Why is this? Because minizakin the regal maisi. We learn it out of Kal V'chomer of nizikin of regal, not of kafir of regal. In other words, the fact that regal pays full damages in a private area, that means that Karen should also pay full damages, including the possibility of kafir. So the Gemara says that's not a good Kal V'chomer. Mal and nizakin the regal sheken yeshna be'esh. Nizikin is not a good argument to obligate you to pay kafir, because nizikin you pay in other types of damages also. For example, nizikin is paid by a fire, right? If you light somebody's property on fire, you pay damages, nizikin. You don't pay kafir though. So how can you make a Kal V'chomer from nizikin to kafir? Kafir is a unique category. It's not regular damages. So the Gemara says you're right. We don't learn it out of regular damages. We learn it out of Talmud. Let's say the animal, it steps on a gift package. Turns out some expensive gift inside. The owner of the animal is chayav anyway, right? Unlike where you lit a fire and the fire, you had a bicycle hidden in a pile of hay, where you'd be exempt for the bicycle. So you learn it out of Talmud of regal. Regal is chayav and Talmud. Now, and an eish is not chayav and Talmud. So the Gemara says, "Mal Talmud sheken yeshnoi bibor." Okay, so in other words, you want to argue that Talmud of regal, right, which is chayav in private property but not in public property, if it's not chayav in public but still chayav in private, full damages. So for sure, kafir of regal should also be chayav in private, full kafir. The Gemara says, but that's also not a good Kal V'chomer. Why? Because bor, a pit, is chayav and Talmud. If something was hidden and it falls into a pit, it's still chayav. Malatamish can yeshna bibor. So you can't really prove Talmud to kafir. So Gemara says mikalim from vessels, because vessels are exempt in a bor. If vessels fall into a pit, you're not chayav on the vessels. Malakalim shkin yeshna be'esh. I'm saying about vessels, you're chayav on in a scenario of a fire. Fire burns vessels, you're chayav. So Gemara says mikalim tumunim. Okay, so the final resolution is just like regal is chayav on vessels that are hidden, even though in a public domain they're exempt, in a private property they're chayav on such vessels that are hidden. So for sure, Karen that's chayav in public should be chayav in private full payments. Makes sense? I said it was a pretty difficult Gemara. Okay.
I'm questioning the whole thing makes sense. We go.
The Gemara says Malakalim Tmunim Shken Yeshan V'Adam. Kalim Tmunim. If you have a person, Adam Mazik Chayfel, right? he destroys something, and there are hidden vessels. He's still chayav. Okay, so therefore, you can't learn from Nezikin to Kaifer because Nezikin is its own category. A lot of the things that have Nezikin don't have Kaifer. So the fact that Regal is chayav on Nezikin full and private property proves zero with regard to Kaifer, because there are other types of damages like Eish, Bar, and Adam, which are also chayav in the same things, and yet we know that they're exempt from Kaifer. So you can't make a point about damages to Kaifer, which is penalty payments, because some of the same things that are chayav for the same damages, we know are exempt from Kaifer, the penalty payments.
Mm-hmm.
It must be that Regal actually does pay Kaifer. If the source of the claim that Karen in private pays full Kaifer Batam, a naive Karen will pay full Kaifer in private property, is Regal, then what does that mean? I'll make a Kaifer Regal. If the source of that is Regal, it must be that Kaifer exists by Regal as well. So Mar says Shema no, that's good proof. Indeed, according to Tarafin, Regal does have Kaifer. An animal tramples over a child in sort of a casual way, then the owner of the animal has to pay Kaifer.
So that's a penalty, that's just not assessed based on value.
So we'll discuss it more in a little bit and more later on the Masechta, but the halacha is that it's a penalty. It's an atonement. It's atonement money. What do they call those things? What did Martin Luther call those things? Indulgences. Martin Luther, what do you call those penalty payments to atone?
Oh,
indulgences, I think it was called. The Reformation. Okay, whatever it is.
Oh.
In general, Judaism. No. In general, Judaism doesn't really have that much. You can give charity and it atones for a lot of sins, but you don't go. You go to the rabbi, ask him to atone for your sin. He's not going to tell you, oh, you must give charity. It's a good idea. In the Catholic Church, they were giving these indulgences. That was part of what. But this is an exception. This is something where the Torah says you want to be atoned, you have to make a payment. Rav Achim Difti says to Ravina, Hochanam Mistavra. This makes sense. They kaifer b'regel. The inside I look like I'm kaifer b'regel. V'tonim is talking to regel ma'isilah. He says, I have another reason why. Because if you're going to tell me that we learn instead of learning from kaifer of regel to kaifer of Karen, we're going to learn from the damages of regel, like we said before. Lifrach mal zaken the regel can yeshna b'regel. In other words, if you're going to say that there's no kaifer regel, and you're going to learn from the nezikin of regel to the kaifer of Karen, the nezikin of regel itself is suspect. Why? Because you can argue that how can you learn from the nezikin of regel to kaifer if regel itself doesn't have kaifer? In other words, the reason why regel pays its full nezikin is because it doesn't have kaifer. So you can't compare that to Karen to say that Karen should have to pay a full kaifer. It makes no sense. It must be that regel also pays kaifer, and this indeed is a valid proof. Okay, if you're not following now, now's a good time to come on. It's much easier. Okay. Adam muad l'olam. The person is habituated to damage in any situation. Bein shogeg, whether it was by accident, bein mezid, if it was intentional, bein error, if he was sleeping, bein yashan, if he was awake. Simas ein chaver v'shiver sakelim. He blinded his friend, or he broke vessels. The shalom mezik shalom, he pays full damages, even if he blinded his friend unintentionally. Ketani simas ein chaver dumi the shiver sakelim. The Mishnah talks about blinding your friend unintentionally, as if you broke vessels. However, there is a difference. What's the difference? The difference is whether or not you get the title of chayvel. A person who destroys things is not a chayvel. Chayvel, that's what I'm trying to explain. Chayvel is the type of damages that's given from person to person damages. Chayvel is assault, basically. Whereas if you break something, I don't know, you broke something, so you have to pay for the broken item. That's not chayvel. What's the point? What's the difference? Ma hasam nezek in arbod varum loy af simas ein chaveri nezik in arbod farm lay. The critical feature is as follows: in order to be chayav for chayvel, what's unique to chayvel? Chayvel makes 5 payments, right? Adam hamazik, a person who does damages. If I go into your property and break things, I don't pay 5 payments. So says the Gemara, you only make the 5 payments if the damage was intentional. If the assault was intentional. If the assault was unintentional, by accident, negligence, I caused you to get damaged, then the payment would only be nezek, not the 5 categories. Okay, I've seen nezek in arbod varam loy. You'd only pay nezek, but not the other 4 categories. Minani mili, top of 26b, first one in the line. How do we know this? So yes, the 4 things is 1 plus 4. So there's nezek. That's you always pay nezek.
Okay.
Nezek is the difference in value. So, for example, if let's say you had a table and then you broke one of the legs, and you tried selling it in the flea market. Well, brand used table, what's that worth? I don't know. It's $30 for used table, and a used table with a broken leg, what's that worth? $5 maybe, $2. So you pay. There's a $25 difference. That's nezek. That's nezek. Nezek is always the same. You always pay nezek, whether it's I damage a table or I damage a person. The 4 remaining payments are tsar. Tsar is the payment. Okay, so what does this mean? Let's say guy twists the other guy's hand and breaks his arm. Okay, now there are other ways. Now, so number 1 is a difference in value. What's the value of a person with a if you were in a slave market and you were selling a guy with a broken arm, what would his value be? Obviously significantly less, because you'd have to fix his arm before you can use it as a slave. I don't know. So let's say his value drops $10,000. Okay, that's nezek. Tsar is 1 second. Let's say we broke your arm under anesthetic, right? So you actually never felt it.
No pain.
No pain at all. How much would a person pay to avoid that type of pain? In other words, the king says he's going to break your arm, but he could do it without anesthesia, or he could do it with anesthesia. How much do you pay for the anesthesia? That's tsar. Okay, ripa is the doctor bills. So now you have to realize that doctor bills are sort of included in nezek. Doesn't make a difference. In other words, you have a slave on the slave market, right? And he has a broken arm. The reason why he's depreciated is partly because you're going to need to pay for the doctor to fix his arm. It doesn't make a difference. You still pay nezek, which is 1 calculation, and you also pay ripa, which is the doctor bills. Okay, sheves is the time that he's invalid. So, exactly, but now you have to realize that sheves is complicated, because sheves. Let's explain. Let's say you have a guy who's an accountant, okay, and he breaks his fingers, okay, and we'll presume that somehow disables him from being an accountant, for argument's sake. Okay, now in the slave market, this guy is a precious slave, right? Because he's an accountant. He's an accountant slave. He's a very talented slave. So he's worth, I don't know, $500,000, $1 million, let's say. It's worth a lot of money. This guy's capable of producing at a very high value for a very long time. Now he broke his fingers. What's he worth? All of a sudden, he's worth, I don't know, a cucumber watchman, right? That's, but no, I didn't make that. By the way, I didn't make that up. That's the Gemara's terminology. Shomer Kishun, the guy who watches cucumbers.
Those cucumbers are sneaky, man.
So in other words, what he's doing in our day and age, what he's doing is he's supervising the parking garage at the airport. You know, he sits in a tower with heat and air conditioning, and he just looks. And he has binoculars, and he can see if anyone's stealing the cars. Right? It's basically a very minimal. However, what about the time that he's in the hospital? He can't even watch the cars. So, okay, so let's explain. So the difference in value between an accountant and a worker that can watch the cucumbers, that's taken care of in nezek. You had the slave that was $1 million slave. Now he's worth $50,000. That's nezek. The fact that he can know what sheves is that now that he's in the hospital for 5 days and can't even watch the parking lot or the cucumbers, that payment is called sheves. Sheves is sort of is basically a minimum wage payment for the time he's completely invalid. He can't even do anything. Okay, that's Shevis. So we did covered Sari, but Shevis and Baishis. Baishis is embarrassment. This is the most difficult part to actually calculate. But we'll soon see some other critical features of Baishis in a few minutes. Baishis embarrassment. But embarrassment sort of is dependent on the individual who engaged in the activity and the individual who received the embarrassment. We say it's lefi ha-mivayesh v'ha-misbayesh. If a guy's arm was broken by, I don't know, some prestigious politician, it's much more right. It's much more embarrassing because it's in the news and everything else. That if a guy breaks his arm because of some carelessness in a factory, right? It also depends on who the victim was, right? If the victim plays for the Trailblazers, right, then his broken arm is a lot more newsworthy, right, than a factory worker. So the payment of Baishas sort of varies depending on how it occurred. Okay,
All right.
fine. That's the 5. So when we talk about 4, the Gemara talks about 4, but it really means 4 plus 1 because Nezek is always the same. So it's 4 additional payments. Okay. Second line. Petza tells you that you're chayiv for nezikin. Shoyig means by accident, like mezid, like intentional. Val oines, even way to translate oines, coerced, karotzen, like he willed it. Okay, so Gemara says 1 second. Petza tells you something else. Haimi boile litin sour b'makam nezek. Petza also tells you that you have to pay for a payment called tsar, the pain, right? The pain we said is the difference in value between undergoing the same damages under anesthesia or not. The Gemara says, we learn both things. Okay, so Omar Rabba. So Rabba here tells us a bunch of general rules. This carries us through the end of the parak. Omar Rabba, a guy had a stone in his bosom, and he didn't realize the stone was there. He didn't recognize the stone was there. He stands up. And the stone falls down. Okay, let's say the stone breaks something. So chayiv, he has to pay nezek. For the other 4 payments, potter, he's exempt. Why? Because he didn't intend to do damage. In other words, a person is muad, he has to pay everything, no matter what type of damage it was. But the 4 additional payments, those are only paid when there's intent to do damage. And we'll soon see the specifics. Okay. Let's say he ends by getting up and this stone falls down, he ends up violating the laws of Shabbos. So, for example, let's say there were kernels of grain, and he gets underneath them, and he gets up, and the rock falls onto the kernels of grain and grinds them. He's exempt. Why? Because Melech's Machshavas as Torah. The Torah requires work with intent, and obviously this guy is not intending on doing anything. Le'inyan Golos. So this was a scary story. Let's say there was a little infant, and the rock rolled down and killed the infant. Does he go to exile or not? So the answer is potter is exempt. Okay, the reason is he did not recognize what he was doing. In other words, if a guy is the classical instance of golos, of exile, is a guy was chopping wood. So he knew he was chopping wood, and then he knew that there's the potential to kill somebody if the hatchet fell off the handle. Okay, but over here, he didn't even realize that there was anything noteworthy standing up. So therefore, he's exempt from exile. Le'inyan Eved. Let's say there was a slave, and the slave broke a bone. So a slave would leave a Rashi says actually he became blind. A Eved Kanani leaves the slavery, he's freed, he's emancipated if the master blinds him. So is he emancipated or not? So the Gemara says, it's the debate between Rosh Gamliel and the rabbis. The Tanya we learned Rabbi Roifa. The master was a doctor. He told him to do some sort of procedure on his eyes, Visima, and he blinded him by mistake. Or he was a dentist and he said, Chasar li shini, take care of my tooth. The pila, and he knocked it out. He laughs at the master and he goes out. He's emancipated. Rav Shimon says, "V'shichasa," and he destroyed. He must have intention to destroy. He has to have intention to do damage. Okay. Next scenario. Hikerba v'shakha v'amad v'nafla. Okay, the guy recognized there was a stone on his lap, and then he forgot about it, and he got up. Le'inyan nezaken chayev. With regard to nezek, he's chayev. He's always chayev for nezek. Le'inyan dalad varim, with regard to the 4 additional payments, potter, he's exempt. Le'inyan golos, with regard to exile, because he recognized there's a stone there, so he should have remembered, and he's chayev, he must go to exile. There had to be a time where he recognized what the potential for damage, and in this case, he recognized it. He realized it was a stone in his lap. And over here, he recognized. Le'inyan Shabbos, with regard to the laws of Shabbos, potter, he's exempt because he didn't realize what he was doing. Le'inyan Eved, with regard to a slave, it's a debate between Rav Shimon Gamliel and the rabbis. If a guy erroneously knocks out a tooth of a slave, does a slave go out free? Okay. Next scenario. The guy threw a rock. He intended on throwing it 2 feet. Whatever. Let's say 4 feet, and he threw it 8 feet. For argument's sake. Okay. Damage. But it went 8 feet, and the Zikin is chayav. In Dalad Varim, potter. In other words, let's say there was a person 8 feet away, but not 4 feet away. And by throwing the rock 8 feet, he actually hit the person. The halacha is, potter, he's exempt. He does not pay Dalad Varim. Why? Because he did not intend on doing damage. If he would have thrown the rock 4 feet, nothing would have happened. Because he threw it 8 feet, he didn't realize he was throwing it 8 feet, and it assaulted somebody. I don't know, it hurt someone. It doesn't make a difference. He's exempt because he didn't intend on doing damage. Exempt from the 4 additional payments, but still chayav, of course, in regular nezikin. You're always chayav in regular nezek. With regard to the laws of Shabbos, he didn't intend on doing a malacha. 4 feet is not a malacha on Shabbos. Only 8 feet is. Roughly speaking, it's a little less. Okay, whatever it is. Okay. With regard to going into exile, okay, this is a unique situation where he does not go into exile. It's a specific exemption. What's the exemption? He did something that would not have caused death, but then erroneously did something else that did cause death. In other words, he had intention not to cause death, to throw 4 feet. By accident, he threw it 8 feet. So in that case, he's exempt from goals. Wait a second. Hold on.
Anything that's done with death.
1 second. Hold on. Okay. I'll go with the second explanation, Rashi. The second explanation here is that over here, you're to the contrary. Over here, you had intention. You're supposed to throw 4 and you threw 8. The Torah says you did not have intention to kill. For example, the classical instance, right? The guy is swinging the axe, the hatchet falls off the handle, and it flies out and kills somebody. Over there, you intended on cutting wood, and in the end, you ended up killing somebody. Over here, you had intention to throw it in the guy's direction. There was intention.
Oh.
Just that it was going to be a little shorter, but you knew that you were getting yourself into a very risky situation, and therefore you don't go to Golos. Golos is for those that are more innocent. You're too guilty.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Jules.
So there's something between death and no death.
So yes. So the truth is, when we learn Makis, we'll see that there's a lot of things that are what we call karav lamezid. In many situations, there's no exile because you're too guilty. Okay, there's a machlokes in the Gemara. According to one opinion, actually, there's no exile. What does that mean? Generally speaking, the law of exile goes roughly speaking as follows: the relatives of the deceased have a right to kill you unless you're in exile. In a case where you're more culpable than exile, then they have a right to kill you, and exile doesn't protect you.
Oh,
That's what goes on. So you're actually more vulnerable, right?
you got to run somewhere else and hide. Pretty good.
You have to hide, basically, yeah. Okay, that's the debate. There's not like it's more markets, but okay, but that would be one way. That's the second explanation of Rashi. Rashi has two explanations here. Okay. Okay, Le'inyan Eved, with regard to a slave, he intended on throwing 4. He threw 4 feet, 2 amas, and threw 8 or 4 amas. It's a machlokes between Rosh Gamliel, Rabbanon, and the rabbis. Okay. The guy intended on throwing 4 amas, and he ended up throwing 8 amas. Le'inyan Izak and Chayev. With regard to damages, Chayev. He's always Chayev in Nizikin. Le'inyan Dalad Varim, for the additional 4 payments, Potter, you're exempt. Le'inyan Shabbos, with regard to the laws of Shabbos, but Aimer Kol Wagam Shetirtza Tenuach in Ilai Lai. Okay, very important with regard to the laws of Shabbos. 4 amas is a malacha. It's a violation. So is 8 amas, obviously, right? Now, let's say the guy was trying to throw it and move it along. He doesn't really care where it lands. He doesn't care if it lands in 4 or lands in 8. And he intends on doing 4 and it ends up doing 8. Chayev, because he doesn't care. If, however, he specifically wants to do 4 and it ends up happening 8, then he's exempt. He does not violate the laws of Shabbos because he didn't do something that he intended on doing. Okay. With regard to exile, with regard to exile, he's still exempt because he intended on throwing, even though except that he threw a little bit differently than he intended on. So he's too culpable, he does not go to exile. With regard to a slave, with regard to a slave, this is a debate between Rosh Gamliel and the rabbis. Okay, next interesting situation. We spoke about this previously. A guy throws a vessel off the roof. Okay, what does he throw off the roof? He throws a glass pitcher off a roof. Okay, and somebody comes in the bottom, and before the glass pitcher hits the ground, so the glass pitcher is still in one piece. He takes a baseball bat and he shatters the pitcher before it touches the ground. Potter, the guy who breaks it, is exempt. My time, I'm on a tefir tover. He broke a broken vessel because a vessel that's a glass pitcher that's flying through the air, at terminal velocity, is not exactly alive. It's a broken pitcher, whether or not it's actually yeah. Okay, here's a very interesting situation. Okay, the guy throws the pitcher from on top of the roof. However, there was a trampoline on the bottom, and it wouldn't have broken. There was mattresses, whatever it is, and sheets, and it would not have shattered. Potter. So what happened? While the item was airborne, flying downward, either him or somebody else removed the mattresses. Potter. Potter, the guy who threw it, is exempt. Why? The truth is actually everybody's exempt in this situation. My time, at the moment the guy dropped the glass thing off the roof, it would not have broken. And the guy who removed the mattress, whether it was the person, it could have been even the person who threw it, he is not chayav because of groma. Groma is sort of indirect damage. He indirectly damaged the item. This mattress was supposed to receive a glass vessel and protect it. He removed the mattress, that's not called damaging the glass. And therefore, he's exempt from damages as well. Okay, another frightening tragedy. A guy throws a kid off a roof, and somebody else went and received the kid with a sword, basically killed the kid.
What?
What?
What did they just do?
Violent event.
He had a sword, the kid.
A guy threw a kid off a roof, and another guy killed him while he was flying downward. Okay. Yeah, nasty story. A very nasty story. It's the debate between Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira and the rabbis. The Tanya we learned. 10 people killed somebody with 10 sticks. All 10 of, whether it happened simultaneously, they collectively beat him to death, or it happened one after another. Kulam Paturin, they were all exempt. Because effectively each of them contributed to his death. So there isn't one person to blame.
So they're all exempt? They're
all exempt. None of them get the death penalty. Rabbi Yehudah ben Beseira says, if it happens one after another, then the last person's chayiv neshikir misasai because he actually killed him. The guy was previously alive and now dead. Okay. Boshor v'kiblei b'karanov. An animal sort of kills the person. Okay, this situation is interesting because it doesn't even it appears to me that this situation does not need to involve a flying infant. What happens if a ox kills an infant? Do you pay kaifer? Let's say it's a shorham woods. So plukta de Rabbi Shmuel b'nei Rabbi Yochanan and break over Rabbanan. It's the debate between Rabbi Shmuel and the rabbis. The Tanya Malon v'nasan pidyon nafshay. We spoke about kaifer. I said we'll get more details of kaifer. Here's some more details. You pay pidyon nafshay. Pidyon nafshay. It's like you can't get better than that. What is that? What's a pidyon nafshay? It's a redemption of the soul, right? It's an atonement payment. Kaifer is an atonement payment. Pidyon nafshay. In other words, in truth, an owner whose animal is habituated for murder, the owner himself is pretty problematic. The owner himself is really, sort of a participant in or complicit in the murder of many people.
Mm-hmm. If
he wants to atone for his sin, then he gives a pidyon nafshay, a redemption for his sin. That's literally what it means. Like, for example, like you want to redeem captives. What do we call that? Pidyon shvuyim. Over here, the guy wants to redeem his soul. Pidyon nefesh. Right, pidyon aben, also redemption. B'nasa pidyon nafshay. How much do you pay to make nizik? The value of the victim. Rabbi Shmuel says you pay the value of the owner of the aggressing animal. So now you have an animal that kills an infant. What's the value of an infant? Minimal. Minimum value to an infant. Certainly, if the infant was flying through the air, the infant has no value at all, right? The victim is about to die anyway. Now, if the animal, if however you pay the value of the owner of the aggressor, the owner of the animal that killed, so then of course you pay. It doesn't make a difference what the value of the kid is. Kaifer is kaifer. You still pay the value of the owner of the animal. Okay, but Rabba says next story of Rabba, also a pretty freaky story. The guy fell down from a roof, and he landed. Part of my language. He landed on top of a woman. Okay, and so the question is, what's the story here? He is so okay. First of all, let's understand here. The guy who fell down from the roof here is considered guilty. Why is he considered guilty? Because it appears in the story that he fell down in regular winds. In other words, he fell down, right? He sort of knew he could have easily fall down. He could have easily fell down. He was pretty guilty for making sure he didn't fall down. Okay, so chayav b'dal dvarim, he has to pay the woman for effectively raping her and causing her pain. Let's say that woman was his yivama, loikana. He does not acquire his yivama. The key to acquire a yivama is intention to cohabitate. That's the key feature. Okay, the Gemara, for example, says if a guy is pardon the perversity, I'm just quoting the Gemara. If a guy has zoonotic intents, okay, and intends on engaging in an act of bestiality, and then I don't know for whatever reason ends up with his yivama, he does acquire her. Because he had an intention of cohabitation. However, if in this scenario he fell off a roof, so he had no intention of cohabitation, so therefore he does not acquire Yivama. Follow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chayev
benezek. Chayev benezek. He's chayev in nezek, but Sarah Baruch B'Shabbos Aval Boishas Loi. He has to pay all the damages. However, Boishas he doesn't have to pay. Why not? The time we learned. Even though the guy here is clearly guilty and sort of has intention to do damage, he did not have the intention to embarrass her. And Boishas is only relevant when he actually intention of embarrassing her.
If he falls off the roof and it's not involving a brother or something.
No, there would be no substance. It's an incident of sort of a rape. It's like a rape. It's not quite because he in the case he he's sort of had somewhat of intention of being with the woman, but not necessarily because he sort of fell down. So he's guilty. He's guilty for the guy here is sort of in between called rape, but that would only be if she was a child and within a certain amount of age, a certain age group. But that also would have to be that he intended on raping her. Over here, he sort of intended on it, but not quite intended.
Okay.
It could have come from his actions, but didn't actually specifically engage in that type of in his action. So he knew that he could have easily damaged the woman, not necessarily rape, just fall on top of her. And therefore he has to pay everything except for precious embarrassment because he didn't intend on raping her. Okay. For Omarabo, next story. Nofal b'Rosh, a guy wrecked him off the roof. His ubayish, and he damaged, and he embarrassed. Chayav al nezek, he has to pay for the damages. Upoter b'dal dvar, but he's exempt from the 4 damages. Why? Because the four damages are completely unintentional. There's no way to protect against it because it was a hurricane. However, Baruch Matzuyef was in regular winds. His ubayish chayav b'dal dvar upoter al bayishis. He's chayav for the 4 payments, right? Nezek plus 3. And not chayav on baishis because baishis embarrassment requires specific intent. Okay, the imnis hapach. Let's say he falls off the roof and then he rolls over negligently and sort of damages somebody. For embarrassing her. In Tanya we learned. Okay, a bunch of men fighting and unfortunately they sort of grabbed the wife of one of them got involved in the fight. The guy grabbed her. So if Vishal Yadu he put his hands on her any dash zikba, I know that he grabbed her. What's the verse specifically saying that he put her hand on her? He put his hands on her and he grabbed her. Okay, if because in this scenario he put his hands on her to intend on inflicting her, then even if he ended up embarrassing her unintentionally, for example, he rips her shirt. Okay, sorry, I lost you there on Zoom for a second. Okay. Again, very, very briefly. No intention at all doesn't make a difference. You're still chayav on nezek. If you want to be chayav on the other 4 payments, let's talk about the other 3 except for embarrassment. The other 3. So nezek plus 3, you need to be grossly negligent of causing the nezek, the damage. To be chayav on baishis, you need intention to inflict harm, not necessarily intention to actually embarrass. Okay, next set of scenarios. A guy puts a coal on top of a person, and the coal literally burns him to death. Potter, the guy's exempt. Why? Because as a human being, he should have realized the coal was on his heart and taken it off. The guy, the human whose coal was placed on his heart should have gotten the coal off his heart before he died from it. However, al bigdav v'nitzraf, if he put a coal on his clothes and the clothes got burnt, chayev is chayev. The guy who assaulted him by putting the coal on his clothing is chayav. Why? Because the guy's entitled to say, look, you put a coal on my clothing, I'm not saving my clothing. I don't want the clothing anyway. You know what? I'm going to take them off and let them burn. And the guy's chayav because he basically burnt the clothing. Amar Rava, the Rava says, Travayo Tanini. We learned both of them in a brisa. The Tanan we learned. A violent thug forces somebody into a fire or into a or he forces him underwater. And the guy either drowns or gets burnt, and he dies. The guy is chayav capital punishment, liable for death, the death penalty. Let's say, however, he pushes somebody into a pool, or he pushes somebody into a fire, and the guy could escape. umes, and he dies, potter, then the aggressor is exempt from capital punishments. With regard to his clothing, big day, the time we learned. Kras ksusi. Somebody says to his friend, rip my clothes. Shavar as kadi, break my barrel. Chayev. The guy is liable because he shouldn't have listened. In other words, what the guy was saying is, if you're going to damage, break my barrel, fine, but I don't care. You'll pay for it. I don't mind taking money instead of my barrel. If, however, he specifies almanas lifter, he tells him on condition you'll be exempt, and potter he's exempt. Okay, boy Rabba. So Rabba had the following question: he puts a coal on a servant, on a slave. Mao, what's the story? Is it like his body, or is it like his money? In other words, is it like he put a coal on a person, or is it like he put a coal on his clothing, on his property? Intim Sulaimar. 1 second. Intim Sulaimar. If he'll say it's like a regular person. Shurima, what's the story with his ox? So Hadra Pashta, then he answered the question, putting a coal on a slave is like putting a coal on a regular person, and the guy is chayav, is exempt from capital punishment if it actually kills him. However, with regard to an ox, if you put a coal on an ox, we don't anticipate the ox will throw the coal off, and therefore you would be chayav on any damages that happened, including the death of the ox. Hadron locates the regal, and this concludes a very difficult parak.